So for outputting card items, we of course need to go to the card component. And there we again need to use context now. So we should import use context from React, and of course import the context object, card context from going up to the store folder and then card dash context. And in the card component, we now call use context and pass card context to it to get access to that card context. Now here, we no longer want this dummy array of card items. Instead, now here we can access card ctx.items to transform these items to items in the card. And before we continue working on the card logic or anything like that, let's actually work on these card items, that they have the correct look, and let's also make sure we output the total amount and so on. And I'll start with the total amount actually. For that here, I'll add a total amount constant, and I will simply access card ctx.total amount. However, I will call toFixed2 here to make sure that we always have two decimal places. And I will put this into a template literal to output a $sign in front of this now dynamically injected and derived JavaScript expression. And that's now the total amount, which should be output here instead of this hard-coded value, like this. So that's now the real total amount for this card. I now also want to make sure that this order button is only showing up if we have items in the cart. So for that, we can add another constant here, right below total amount maybe, which I'll name has items. And here I'll simply check if cart context items has a length greater than 0. So if there are items in the cart. And now we can use has items down there to check if has items is true and only render the button if that's the case. And with that already, if I reload, you see if I open the cart with no items, we have no order button and a total amount of 0. But if I start adding a couple of items, we see them here, we see the updated total amount, and we got an order button. Now, at the moment, items are still added incorrectly to the cart. We're going to work on that soon. But before we do that, I want to work on how these cart items are being displayed. Now for that, I prepared a component for you. Attached, you find a card item zip file, which contains both a card item JS file and a card item module CSS file. Simply copy both files into that card folder. That's simply a card item component, which is not too fancy, which is why I'm just providing the finished component to you. In the end, this will just output the price, the amount, and then buttons for adding or removing more of that card item. And in card.js, we can now use that card item. So here you can simply import card item from that just added card item file. And then render, instead of that list item here, a card item. Whoops, card item. Like this. And to card item, we now need to pass a key, of course, since it's a list. And that can be or should be item.id. We also want to display the name, so that's item.name. We want to display the amount, which is item.amount. And pass the price, which is item.price. And then also pass functions for adding or removing items from the cart. So I will add these functions here now and add my cart item remove handler, where I get the ID of the to be removed item, and my cart item add handler, where I get the item itself. And we'll add the logic to these functions in a second. And now here on the cart item, which we output in the list, we should add an onRemove prop, because that's the name I'm expecting in that provided component. And to onRemove, we pass a pointer to cart item remove handler. and we add a onAdd prop, another prop I'm using in that provided card item component, where we point at the card item add handler. Now on both these functions, you should call bind and bind null item ID. This ensures that the ID of the to be added or removed item is passed here to remove handler. And on add, you should also call bind and bind null and pass the overall item. You learned that bind pre-configures a function for future execution and basically allows you to pre-configure the argument that function will receive when it's being executed. And that's something we need here to ensure that both these functions do receive the ID or the item respectively. Now with that, your card should look something like this. And here I'm zoomed in, which is why it's a bit cut off. It should look something like this. Now, to make sure that this is never cut off, I'll also quickly go to the card module CSS file. And here, I'll go to card items and give this a max height of, let's say, 20 rem, and then add overflow scroll. By doing this, I make sure that this can't get too big, but that instead it becomes scrollable. But your card should now look like this. And of course, the problem we have here is not just that these buttons won't work, but that, for example, here we also have sushi 3 times, which is absolutely not what we want here. I also want to go to card item and quickly make sure that on the price here for props price in the card item component, I also call toFixed2 to force this to always have 2 decimal places, for example here for the schnitzel now. So now, as a next step, I want to make sure that the logic for adding items to the cart is different, and if we add sushi a second or third time, it's aggregated together into one item where this amount changes, instead of more items being added to this array.